We can stand for Pledge of Allegiance. Teresa, can you lead us?
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Turn it right over to Mr. Polito.
Well, although we only have 2 items on the agenda tonight, we do have a lot to cover, but this is a pretty exciting night. It's been a little over a year since we had the $14 million in education subsidy permanently set into our basic education funding formula. And, we spent this last year really doing a lot of planning because we wanted to spend that money right. And really tonight we're going to go over a facilities plan and some options on how to finance it. And I think tonight really marks the point where we're moving out of the planning phase and into the doing phase. So it's exciting. The architects are here tonight. We have spent all summer working with them on this plan. There's been a lot of work that's gone into it. I'm very excited about what we're seeing here in phase 1. I think it's a great plan, and without further ado, I'd like to get into it. So I'd like to introduce Greer Hayden and Bob Engelbaugh from HHSDNR.
Thank you very much, and we're very appreciative of the opportunity to work on the study for the district. As Mr. Polito said, we've been working in the past few months on collecting a lot of information that we've now been able to simulate and put into a condensed report for you this evening. We have most of the team members that were part of the entourage that went through your buildings and made some analysis and made cost estimates. I'd like to introduce them. Mr. Polito said Rob Engelbaugh, my partner here in the firm, John Finn, our associate architect here. Our consultants from CJL Engineering is Jim Bazzini here, and then sitting behind the board members there is Tom Kapsis and Rodney Wolf, mechanical electrical people. So we have about 6 more people that are on the team that are not here this evening, but these are the people that have headed up major disciplines of infrastructure in the buildings here at Erie's. We have in front of you a very voluminous report. It includes, obviously, a small introduction, the credentials of each of the team members, a summary of our findings, an overview of the school district, and then we have building evaluations for all the schools here in the district, and then we have cost estimates and timelines that are included in here as well. We're going to refer to some of the pages this evening, but for the sake of time and getting really down to the specifics, we've kind of condensed this somewhat in a PowerPoint that you also have in front of you this evening too. So if we can move forward with the PowerPoint, we're going to kind of ham and egg that a little bit by having different speakers speak to different specifics. Then we'll all participate. I think it'll be most productive if we have some interaction from the board members as we go through this. If you have questions, please feel to raise your hands or shout out a question. I'll be happy to address it at that time. I think that will be very beneficial for everyone that's here. This evening, what we would have to show you are our small agenda. We have a couple maps that are district maps that show the attendance areas for the different schools. A very broad overview of enrollments and observations of those enrollments. Priority infrastructure improvements. What we have recommended as phase 1 priorities. Basically, it's a starting point for the board to weigh in on those. Costs for the existing schools, and then you see we have some costs for some of the schools that have been closed or no longer have students in them. A timeline, and then again more discussion at the end. We have performed evaluations of 22 schools, athletic facilities, closed buildings, the service center. We've looked at the district's goal to assess each physical plant's capital improvements needs, and the administration building, the culinary center. We did not evaluate those facilities. So those are the only facilities that we did not provide any evaluation as part of our task on the report. These needs have been evaluated and categorized, and their costs have been summarized so that the district can plan for multi-year implementation improvements. The costs illustrate the needed infrastructure improvements. I'm going to scroll down for me a little bit there.
The facility plan incorporates data from previous reports, plans, and other documentations, discussions with the administration, the facilities and maintenance staff, and our building tours themselves, our personal observations. Moving forward, the first overview of the maps here for the district. This shows your current attendance areas for the elementaries on the left, and on the right are the attendance areas for the middle schools and the high school. You can see how the attendances are distributed throughout the district. That's in larger print in that larger format in the PowerPoint and also in the major study report. The next observation we had was enrollments and capacities. And just to kind of explain capacities a little bit, utilizing the Department of Education standards for building capacities, in our elementary buildings, basically they assign 25 seats per classroom. You may have more, you may have less, depending on district policies. Some districts we see that as many as 35, depending on the district's philosophies and union contracts, etc. For this analysis here, we're using 25 in an elementary setting. That's for your core classrooms, special classrooms, special education classrooms, art, music, multi-purpose rooms, libraries, get 0 capacities. Speaking specifically to special needs classrooms, those students are considered to be in the main enrollments, so they're going from the homeroom into a special needs classroom and then back to the regular grade classroom. So those rooms get no capacity. If you were in a reimbursable setting for a Plan-Con project where the state would be contributing some monies towards the projects, special needs classrooms would get capacity for that purpose, but not for justifying enrollments. So if you look at the elementaries, you can see on the left that's the PDE capacities. On the right are the enrollments that were in 2017, 2018 at the end of the year. In the beginning of this year, you can see the next column over, which is the third column for this year's enrollment. Now that's obviously an up and down target. When that snapshot was taken, those were the numbers, and that was, I think, the third day enrollment that we have up there. And then on the far right, you can see the deviation from seats available versus enrollment. So if it's a negative, we're short 67 seats. If it's a plus, in the case of, let's see, Edison, there's 65 excess seats. So it gives you a little snapshot there. Down at the bottom, we summarize a subtotal for the elementary grade levels. There's a capacity of 5,750. This year's enrollment is 5,396. So over that whole spectrum of elementary buildings, there's an excess of 354 seats.
I'd just like to point out is when we look at this way to look at enrollment is a little bit different than the last report we had, which took into consideration, they had what they called a functional capacity, which actually counted the special ed classrooms and some of those other rooms when they took into consideration capacity. So you can see here, as Greer pointed out, we are counting all our special ed students in the enrollment, but as when it comes to the capacity, we aren't counting those classrooms as space. So when we have some of our elementaries that have multiple self-contained special ed classrooms, that's where maybe we see some of those areas where the capacity is less than what the actual enrollment is. So again, it's just a little different way to look at how our enrollment is across the district.
If we take a look at the next block down, the middle school levels, you can see what those capacities are. What's a little bit different here from your elementary buildings, your K-5 buildings, the middle schools get capacities for gymnasiums, get capacities for science rooms, art, music, where we would not receive that at the elementary level. So they still assign 25 students for a regular classroom, English, math, social studies, etc. Then they use a utilization factor. Let's say that's a capacity of 100. They use a utilization factor of 90%, and then so the actual capacity would be 90 in that situation. So utilizing that brief explanation, the capacity for the Easton Middle School, as an example, was 1,098. The enrollment was 740 this year, so we have about 358 excess seats. Temper that with what I just said about art, music, and gymnasium space too, okay? If we subtotal the middle school grade levels, we have a capacity of 3,316 seats. Enrollment number is 2,341, so theoretically there's an excess seating capacity of 975 seats at the middle school grade buildings. Likewise at the high school, same analysis as middle schools. We're utilizing capacities for gymnasiums and science rooms, etc. Capacity of the high school, including the both technical classrooms, career programs, is 2,359. The enrollment is 2,383, so there's theoretically a shortage of 24 seats there. With the academy, we have an excess capacity of 463 in that last column, with when you compare 1,360 available seats to 897 enrollment. District-wide at the bottom, we have capacity for 12,785 students. We have enrollment of 11,017. So technically, we have about 1,768 empty seats in the district. So again, it's a snapshot. It's just a tool to use as you go through it. I hope the explanation of how we arrived at those numbers makes sense to everyone. Yes, sir.
Question, the Collegiate Academy numbers, where you're showing such a pretty substantial number, is that the current available classrooms, or is that?
That's what you're using right now, not what's closed or what's open. It includes rooms that are open,
Okay,
not fully
available
utilized.
for occupancy?
Yes, right.
Thank you.
At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Bob Engelbaugh to go through some of the infrastructure improvements that we've identified. And again, please feel free to ask questions as we move along.
Thank you. The information you're looking at here is on page 3 of your study. We'll kind of reference back to the study because some of the print gets a little bit small. But what this is a summary, some verbiage just to outline some information will come later in more detail. We have cost figures on each of these categories. So we'll spend some time a little bit further here when John's speaking to look at some of the actual costs for this. But these categories were created by, first let's walking through all the buildings. Almost 2 million square feet of buildings we walked through, including the roofs. And thank you to Eric, because he was there most of the time, opening doors, and also to your engineers. They were able to get us through all the rooms, all the roofs, all the boiler rooms, and out of that we tried to sift through our findings and try to lend some logic to how some of these renovations and improvements, upgrades can happen. So this is a brief outline of how that can happen. A couple of notes on the left-hand side. Two of the items that we're working on right now are some coal bunker infrastructure improvements and also some roofing, which were the higher priorities. And items 1 through 13 are what we're calling our phase 1 priorities, the highest priority items, of which those two are. And for the most part, the philosophy is what's going to keep everybody warm, safe, and dry. So that's the main purpose of the improvements, infrastructure improvements we're looking at throughout the district for all the 22 buildings. But as a priority, we're talking about safety vestibules being the first priority. As we look at the cost, you'll see we'll have a dollar amount established for a safety vestibule that gets parents into the building, into the office, either into the building from there or excused from the office. So there'll be architectural designs that come along with that. Also, there's cutting and patching of lights and HVAC and what have you to make those happen. So there's associated costs with that too. Item 2 going down is access control, which is related to it. Some way to secure the exterior of the building. All the exterior doors will be secured and can be fed into the office for control and recording of doors, how they're entered into and so on. Then the appropriate people would receive access cards to go in and out of the building. Item 3 then, the roof replacements. Some of the roofs, like Harding, are in bad shape. They'll be the first. And again, there's a priority list of how even the roofs would be replaced. But there are roofs throughout the district that will be replaced. Item 4 is the building envelope. That's going to be, we have a separate line item for windows, but a lot of brick upgrades, pointing, cleaning, caulking, coping repairs, all those are related to that infrastructure to keep the water out so it doesn't do any damage to the building. Structural repairs, item 5. In some cases, there are some structural repairs we're going to recommend. It is a higher priority item. And related to that too are 3 coal bunkers that are in disrepair that are going to need upgraded and repaired. You no longer use the coal, but it's a large underground void that some of the structure is failing on them, so it needs to be upgraded and addressed. Life safety upgrades are going to be fire alarm systems, emergency generators, some of the panel electrical wiring. Those items would be life safety type upgrades. Windows we talked about. Some of the windows at the high school are single pane glass windows. So, and there are some others too that are in need of replacement. Paving, item 9. A lot of the paving parking lots are in very poor condition. In some cases, you're down to potholes and gravel. So they need to totally redone from the bottom up, and there are many of those throughout the district. The chiller replacement goes along with HVAC rooftop unit type upgrades. Again, those are selected. Elevator upgrades, again, some are significant, some are just minor upgrades. Item 12 is the turf at the stadium, and then also some stadium upgrades that need to coincide with that due to the turf being surrounded by a failing concrete structure. And item 13 then are automatic temperature control systems that come along with item 10, some of the HVAC upgrades. That is what we're categorizing for option 1. And we see option 1 occurring over a 3-year period. And we can show you in some later slides how each of these years are used to, obviously the first priority is the first year, second year, third year. And that's how we're going to look at phase 1. And we've turned out dollar amounts and for what that phase 1 amount is. If we can scroll up just a little bit, the next area is what we're calling future priorities. Again, those will be occurring at a later date. Similar type scope, a little bit of an adjustment of that will occur as we get into phases 1, 2, and 3 there, or years 1, 2, and 3 with the first phase. So they're pretty much the same type of approach, but be more refined as we get 4 years out. Item 4 then, if we could scroll up, is again more...
Mr. President,
Yes.
I just want to ask a brief question about this page. I noticed that in the phase 1 priorities and the remaining future phase priorities, there are some things that are duplicated, like building envelope repairs and structural repairs, the automatic temperature control repairs. What is the reason why they are in 2 different phases?
You know, what we're going to do is phase 1 will be the highest priority. You know, those that require the most attention the fastest. Then the remaining future phases, year 4 and beyond, would be those that we can maybe push back a little bit further, and just trying to prioritize the money towards the areas that need it more so than others. That's
So
the
would
reason.
these be different buildings
Yes.
then that we're talking about?
Yes, yes.
Different buildings.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. This slide is also further back about page 239 in your book. If anybody wants to look at it there, but what we did then was look at this scope of work and break it out into this 3-year breakout, year 1, 2, and 3. So again, trying to think of things of keeping students and staff and everybody warm, safe, and dry. Item 1 is what we're, the highest priority is the Harding Elementary School roof. And there's also some masonry repair that goes along with that. Anytime we're changing out copings and flashings and things like that, which are 98% all masonry buildings, there's a lot of masonry repair that will go along with the re-roofing part of that. So that would be at Harding. The coal bunker repairs, item 2, Wilson, Jefferson, and Lincoln all have old abandoned coal bunkers, and so those are in need of attention, and we're showing those as item 2 in our list. Item 3 then are partial renovations to the high school. The high school is your biggest building, a little bit over 400,000 square feet, and it has a lot of needs. It has been addressed over the years, as well as all of them, and I would say all of your schools have been as well taken care of as they can be, with 2 million square feet of buildings to take care of. But there's a lot of things you got to look at, and the high school is in need of several things. The biggest thing is there's what we call a core wing, and also then like the dogleg wing. Those are the 2 areas of the school that are in need of the most upgrades. And that's going to be things like lighting and ceiling, electrical upgrades, HVAC boiler restoration, hot water heater replacement, gymnasium bleachers, interior and exterior doors pretty much throughout. The next building would be Northwest Collegiate Academy. Structural repairs in the underneath the promenade area is 2 old gyms and an auditorium. That roof type structure there is in need of repairs. And then the roofing that would go along with that, as well as the roofing for the rest of the high roof areas on that building. When we would make those structural repairs, again, there's 2 gyms and an auditorium. The 2 gyms would be restorated and updated. The natatorium would not be returned to a natatorium, just a usable, larger interior space. Item 5 is the service center roof. It's in pretty bad shape. There's plastic laying over top of a lot of materials, and we would recommend it being a higher priority. Item 6 is the Lincoln pavement. Again, a lot of potholes and gravel. Item 7 is in the same category. 8 is Veterans Stadium. Your turf's been in about 10 years, ending the end of its usable life. Again, when we replace the turf, it is surrounded by precast concrete structure, so that structure would have to be updated at the same time, so we're not doing that at a later date over top of new turf. Item 9 would be the safety vestibules and access controls, all of the buildings. Item 10, Edison and Lincoln emergency generators, and 11, the Wilson roof and masonry restoration. And that would be the first year initial priorities that we would see. Item 2 then, or page 2 here, would be our secondary year 2 replacements. And again, the roof replacements, item 1, going through all those schools would be the next priorities. The ones we saw in year 1 are your worst case. These have a little bit left in them, but again, trying to keep things dry would be the high priority here, and why the roofs would move to the top of the second year 2 here. Paving, item 2 at Strong Vincent. Item 3, partial renovations, again, going to the high school. So we took care of the first priority items the first year. The second year, we're going to come back and pick up some of the other things that we know are high priorities. They're all listed there for repaving. The south wing or dogleg wing is, depending how you look at it or want to call it, window replacement, flooring, gymnasiums, interior doors, ADA updates throughout the building, emergency generator, ATC systems, along with all HVAC upgrades for the rest of the building above and beyond the core area. Emergency generator replacement, item 4, Northwest Academy, Strong Vincent, Wilson, and Grover Cleveland. Again, those are the life safety items we looked at, and again, then the fire alarm upgrades at Wilson, Edison, Grover Cleveland, Lincoln, and Piper Burley. And then finally the elevator upgrades. The last piece to the first phase is year 3, looking at a more concentrated effort at heating, ventilating, and air conditioning systems, along with ATC upgrades. Again, just looking at, just kind of filling in behind what we've started on some of these other schools, but a more complete attack on the HVAC upgrades. The other item then would be sound systems. We looked at this as being a higher priority, just from a safety standpoint. If there has to be announcements throughout the building, we need to make sure they need to get to all the spaces and places throughout the building. So we wanted to put sound systems on one of the first priorities, this being the 3rd year, so we would highly recommend that. for each of those buildings that you see there. And then finally, looking at Edison and Lincoln. Edison and Lincoln are the two schools at this point that need the most attention. It's a total upgrade from top to bottom, so we would bring that in on a third-year timing scenario. Okay, this is on page 241 of your booklet. Again, unless you have good eyes, you're not going to see too much of this. But the main point of this we wanted to point out is this is the way we looked at the evaluation of these buildings. After we completed our extensive walkthrough through all the buildings, we tried to categorize them first by building, which is down the left-hand side, high school, middle school, elementary, and then other. Then across the top, we broke it into an overall general condition, fair, good, bad. And there's an attachment for the first page in the appendix of your study booklet that gives you a PDE explanation of what that means. So we use that to try to give it a rating. Second, then we have the roof square footage and the building square footage. Again, give you an idea of the scale of these buildings. Again, like your high school, is 430,000 square feet of building. That's a lot of building. And that translates into about 240,000 square feet of roof. That roof in particular is your good roof. It has been recently upgraded, replaced, and is currently under warranty. The rest of the categories then, paving in sight, exterior doors, windows, exterior envelope, interior doors, safety vestibules, elevators, flooring, paint, ceilings, roofing, natatoriums if they're in the buildings, gymnasiums, miscellaneous updates, and also ADA upgrades. So those are the categories we looked at for each building. And then this is also true if you scroll to the next page. We did the same thing for HVAC. Again, looking at the across the top gives you the explanation of the HVAC equipment, and down the left-hand side are again the buildings. The yellow color that you're seeing on this will come in when John steps up here, but that's identifying the phase 1 scope of work. So you can see wherever the yellow is going to be phase 1, wherever it's white is a later phase. So after we identified all the needs throughout the buildings, we had to prioritize those, and then phase 1, the costs in yellow, are what will eventually here turn out a total cost for your first phase. And that, again, that's for general HVAC, and if you can scroll to the next slide then, for electrical and plumbing and fire protection. So those are the way we looked at the building. Again, we've looked at all these pieces, parts for all the buildings, and try to bring this information to some order to present to you in this PowerPoint and this study. So from here, as you're going to have John Finn, and John and I worked on this together to walk through all your buildings along with the CJL team. So he was going to walk through a little bit more detail on some of the costs. So, John?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, everyone. I think just to build on what Bob was saying is we went through all of the buildings and we pulled together the reports and our opinions and expertise from Eric's experiences here. We associated a dollar amount to each of these figures, which correlates to these spreadsheets that you're seeing here and that are found in the study book. But as we started to look at the priorities, this warm, safe, dry, and this the initial needs of the district, that's what generated this yellow scheme. So as we continue through on this PowerPoint here, if you wouldn't mind, please, you'll start to see the yellow theme continue. And we are breaking out and pulling the numbers of the yellow, the phase 1 priorities out into what you will see over the next few slides. In particular here, number 5, this is page 12 of your handout there for the PowerPoint. This is the cost that will be allocated over the next 3 years for the high school, for the high schools in general. This is the Erie Central High School as well as the Northwest Collegiate Academy. As you can see here, I won't get too far into the numbers, we could certainly revisit those if there's any particular details, but all those categories, the exterior windows, the exterior doors, interior doors, finishes, ceilings, and all the HPE, heating, plumbing, electrical come into this. Our grand total, as you can see here on the right for Erie Central High School, for this phase one, will be almost $28 million, $27.9 million. And then at Northwest PA Collegiate Academy, we're looking at a cost at this point for all trades, the general heating, plumbing, electrical, and the soft costs, which is about 23% of those, to equal a project total of $9.9 million, with a grand total at the high schools of $37.8 million. Now this would be allocated over that 3-year period and associated to those projects that we reviewed, or that Bob reviewed, as the year 1, year 2, and year 3 priorities, the initial, secondary, and remaining priorities. As we move on forward here into the middle schools, this is East, Strong Vincent, and Wilson Middle School. Not as much money is going to be allocated there is in comparison to the high schools. Erie High School is a much larger structure with some more needs. But you can see here at East, $2.6 million. Strong Vincent with a little bit more work required under this phase one at just over $3 million. And then Wilson Middle School down below, which we are doing a little bit more work yet, at $4.4 million almost. Our grand total there is just over $10 million at the middle schools to be allocated over that 3-year period. And then as we scroll through to examine the elementary schools, this is just a brief snapshot. So we have all the elementary schools here, which were probably in much better shape than other, in general, had better qualities than the other buildings. Not as much work is allocated here, but you will notice that the Edison number here is a total renovation. There was a lot of elements that need to be updated to bring it up to prevailing standards. And then we would have other schools such as Deal, which are in good shape, don't need a whole lot of work done to them. So you can kind of see, just going down the right-hand side, at Deal Elementary School, we'd have approximately $23,000, very little scope work. Edison would be a total renovation, would be a larger ticket item, would be almost $15 million. Grover Cleveland would be $1.8 million. Harding would be another $1.8 million. That would include the roofing work and the masonry that is in that first priority. Jefferson Elementary School, $1.1 million. Joanna Connell, almost 1.3 million, 1.227. Then Lincoln Elementary School would be another larger renovation of $4 million. McKinley Elementary, which was in need of some stuff, at $1.2 million. Perry Elementary School at just over $500,000, $571,000, and then Piper Burley Elementary School at $2.4 million. Now you can see the grand total of all these, as it comes down to it. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yes, please.
Are these including air in some of these schools, or?
Air conditioning only in locations that are required. In other locations in large areas, it would be potentially an alternate bid, so it would be the district's choice down the line whether or not that would be included. There's some locations where air would be required, interior classrooms and other spaces like that would be required for building code to have that air conditioning in there.
It does address rooms that are already air conditioned.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Comparing existing, and that's about it for the air conditioning.
So it's just only repairing air conditioning that's already in the building. It wouldn't be adding any air.
Right, unless there's places that you guys identified that we really need to have it, that we hadn't before. I'm just thinking of
There's some
Yes.
options that we've talked about that could be some alternate bids that we might consider while we're doing certain pieces of work. It might make sense to look at what the cost would be to air condition some spaces. But for the most part, these numbers include rooms that are already, or were originally air conditioned, that may not be working and needs to be replaced. Edison would be a good example. It's going to be a complete renovation, so that's all new heating, all new electrical system at one time. So it'd be an option for the district to consider total air conditioning in that building if the funds are sufficient. That's a possibility.
Yes, sir.
The previous
picture of the middle school's east HVAC jumped out at me because just, unless I'm lost track of how old the building is, it's relatively newer, and I just wondered, it seems like a short period of time to have that be have such a high amount of cost. How old is East?
About 20.
99.
And the majority of that cost, and I'll let Jim explain this, would be involved in automatic temperature controls required for the building. But Jim, if you want to go ahead and run through what that would be.
Well, you don't have to give me a lot of detail.
Yeah.
It just seems relatively, it's not as old as Strong. That's the most of the
Well, it's not as old, and you're correct there, but the chiller is having issues, so we have a number to replace the chiller. That building is currently fully air conditioned. We have some numbers for air handling unit replacements, and then we have an item for automatic temperature control upgrades. Those are the three big ticket items on there that reflect the majority of the HVAC number for that school.
How old is McKinley? Is it person? Because of the roof at McKinley, when that came up, it just seemed like, to me, they're newer and shouldn't be such a problem, but I guess I have to admit, time has flown for me faster than I like to admit. Thank you, that's all.
Thank you.
I think McKinley was built when you got
Nice.
first elected.
The other facilities that we described in those year 1, year 2, year 3 priorities, you can see Emerson Gridley will carry some additional renovations, approximately $1.1 million. And then we have a new roof at the service center as well as some renovations to the Veterans Memorial Stadium there, 1.3 at the service center and 1.2 million at the Veterans Memorial Stadium. But to kind of summarize the last few pages here, if you'll go to the next slide, please. And you can see this on page number 244 of the study book, but also on page number 16 in the handout there. All of those bits and pieces that we just went through for the high school, the middle school, and the elementary school, as well as those other facilities, are going to be compiled into this one chart. Here you can kind of see we have our general heating, plumbing, electrical numbers that would associate for each of those facilities across those 3 years, as well as the soft cost, which would be added to that, which includes, surveys and additional information, design fees and things of that nature. In this column here to equal our grand total at the right-hand side. And as we went down through all of those, if you'll scroll down just a little bit further, the bottom line figure at this point in time for the phase 1 priorities and what we're looking at is $80,806,000. Now, the other aspect of that, going back to the original spreadsheets where we looked at the white and the yellow, is the next page. This will be future phases. These are the other priorities that we had going across that weren't as initial, weren't as important at these first 3 years. As we look into those additional costs would be future phases of what we're calling it. That could be after that 3-year point for another 3 years, or another set of time depending on what the board would require or what the district would require at that point. I'm not going to go through all of these additional numbers, but just in general, we've allocated another almost $70 million at the high schools, which would be Collegiate Academy as well as Erie Central. This would be more renovations, more updates to the building beyond what we've reviewed already across that first 3 years. The middle schools would be an additional $30 million. And that's more renovations, more requirements, more upgrades. And this is where perhaps some of the equipment we're going to get more life out of in this first 3 years, but eventually it's going to approach a point where it needs to be replaced or reconstructed. The elementary schools would follow that same mentality beyond that 3-year mark. Another 29 point, almost $30 million there, and then the other facilities down there, just a little bit more at 1.2 million. And the grand total for the future phases at this point, as we were looking at this, was an additional $130,317,000.
Just a couple add-on comments to that. At the end of the 3-year period, this would have to be reprioritized. This is what we see today, but things can get better, or things may stay the same, but we do see in building systems, sometimes deterioration starts to accelerate. So you would need to go back and revisit this at that time and reprioritize that. Secondly, that number is going to go up in 3 years. So we're looking at these at today's cost, but 3 years out, that could be a different number too. So just keep that in mind too.
Thank you, Gary. Any questions before we move on? In addition to the operating facilities, the existing facilities that are in the district's control now, we've also been charged with the task to review the vacant facilities, Burton, Irving, and Wayne. It was a walkthrough that we did just to analyze where things were, to spell out the best needs of the district and give you guys the full comparison. In general, the vacant facilities, we looked at the kind of the broad brush renovations that would be required there, and came up with an additional chart here that you can see. This is from page 246 of the study book, and then also page 18 on the handout. The idea is that Burton, Irving, and Wayne, should the school, should they be reopened, these would be our recommended renovations for them to be reopened and brought back into prevailing standards. You can see just individually, Burton would be an $8.3 million upgrade to bring it back. Irving would be $9.7 million. Wayne Middle School would be $12.8 million price tag. Total for all of those would be an additional $30.8 million, and then the soft costs on top of that would bring our project costs for those up to 37.9, almost $38 million. And just as a comparison, down at that bottom left-hand chart there, should those buildings be noted for demolition if we were going to take them down completely? This also includes Roosevelt, which is currently vacant as well. The price tags for those would be, an additional $392,000 for the demolition of Burton. Irving would be $486,000. Wayne at $642,000, and Roosevelt is carrying a price tag currently of $850,000.
Why would that be? Why would Roosevelt be so much more of a demo? I mean, what are the varying factors when it comes to Roosevelt being poured out as opposed to, Burton? Well, I see Roosevelt's a bigger school. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
Okay.
There's more to take down. There's more
Right.
infill. There's
Okay.
more asbestos that would be would need to be dealt with as well, potentially.
And we did take a look at, the possibility of, especially on the east side, with the condition of Lincoln and Edison possibly reopening Burton and trying to do a redistricting on that side. But if we were able to do that, the Burton currently, with this renovation proposal, does not have the capacity to handle what we would need to do to redistrict, and plus the geographic location of that school compared to the other ones makes it very difficult and would add some additional cost for transportation, and really overall we would have to change the total map on the east side in order to do something like that. And looking at that, the last time we did this last year and in previous years, we lost students to charter. So the risk that we take by doing this to save a few dollars, we didn't feel was worth it, and decided that the better approach would be to go with doing the renovations with Lincoln and Edison. And especially with Lincoln, with the full renovations, or Edison, we are going to need some swing space. So at this point, probably we would be looking at using Burton as swing space as we start to do the renovations over there.
How much renovation would have to be done to Burton just to use it as swing space? I mean, would there be because I mean, it's not being used at all right now, so how much would it?
Be a lot of cleanup,
Just
generally.
cleanup mostly, but.
Well, there'd be some finishes that need to be taken care of. We'd have to evaluate all the plumbing systems and things of that nature, because they have not been
Right.
used. And we'd have to establish an area for serving of lunches and things of that nature, so. there'd be a significant amount of work, and we haven't looked at that completely yet, but Wayne would be another alternative to that as well, because, you know, we had it open a year ago, it probably would require a little bit less. It's a larger building, but we did at Demerson Gridley this summer, so it's something that would be achievable.
Next, just to kind of guide you through this, going back to the idea, the mentality of this, the next 3 years. So in looking at those priorities and how they would play out into a design and construction phase for the district, this timeline will kind of show what we would do to march through all of these elements. As you can see here, and this is on page 247 of your study booklet, the initial year one design phase would begin rather immediately, and we would start to tackle all of those high priorities. The Harding roof, the coal bunkers. We'd also have some, the high school core for the HVAC issues, as well as some other renovations. The Collegiate Academy renovations and some other roofing, paving, and the stadium. We'd also bring in the safety vestibules. We would start to kind of march through all of those as well. As you can see, then we would transition. We're trying to hit these summers for the construction as much as possible. The schools are empty. We can be in there with as many contractors as we can. We can get as much work done as we can. So as you can see, the initial year one would start in that first summer, and you can see the projects there listed in red would be the ones we would make it more of a priority to get those completed within that first summer so that they're usable for the district by the time kids are returning there in the fall. But you can see our initial construction phase would start here just before, just after this 2018-2019 school year, and we would span that into the Christmas break of 2019. And that would involve all of those projects listed under that initial year one that we've been discussing. The design phase then for the secondary of phase one, the year two, would begin just after we get those projects out the bid for that first phase of construction, and we'd start to tackle some of the larger projects. The renovations at the high school to the south wing, which is the dog leg wing, as well as some other bigger projects within there. Because then we can capture more of that summer and hit the ground running with contractors there as kids are leaving in the 2020 school year. And then we would bring them back in the fall and complete those projects there and continue our design phase into the remaining year three, which we would try to cover some more bigger projects. You can see there's the renovations to Edison and Lincoln, as well as some other stragglers that are down at the end. But then we could utilize more time frame in potentially 2 summers of that remaining year three, which would be beneficial for larger projects such as Edison and Lincoln. And go ahead.
No. When you're saying you have to put the bids out for contracts, so a lot of these estimations, they're not really secure like in your prices. So these prices even could go up more.
Yeah, scopes could change a little bit once they're in the design phase, and prices could go up depending on that. So that would be that first year, those prices could be, these are estimates, so they're not hard bid numbers yet.
Mr. President?
Yeah.
Veterans Stadium. We're citing that as a liability to the Erie School District. I suppose we got to be pitting Robbie's years to all of this, being that you're on that board, as I recall. Do they have reserves or assets allocated toward the turf?
Right. They have been for many, since the last turf, they have been saving the money. That's the major reason for their funding, is that they save the money for the renovation of the turf itself. Now, as far as we're looking at the entire wall that goes around that,
right.
And I don't know if we have enough in the funds. The Stadium Commission only has enough funds to replace the turf, but as far as the construction around the outside, that was not something that we were looking at, and that's what we're looking at now.
So
correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there, now I'm gonna go back to the archives. Wasn't there a deal struck with a vending company that they would actually replace the turf in exchange for services or?
That's long before my time.
that used
Oh,
to
it was
happen.
not your layer.
I wasn't here. It certainly is. Call me a liar. That's why you have him sit that far away from that.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Pepsi was the vending company, yeah.
That used to happen in the 90s and early 2000s when school districts were allowed to sell sugary beverages in schools. So typically you would sign an exclusive beverage contract with one of those, either Pepsi or Coke, and receive a pretty substantial upfront payment for that. Now that what we're allowed to sell in the schools is very restricted, those type of contracts have basically disappeared. Because there's really, there's no volume of product that's being sold within our schools. We do have, as Robbie said, I think we have enough for the turf in the Stadium Commission account. We were planning to move ahead and do the turf next year with those funding, with the funds available. But we kind of held that up because we wanted to have the architects go through, because again, we didn't want to go ahead and replace that turf and then have to come through another year or two later or 3 years and possibly tear it up or damage it by doing the repairs within the stadium. So after they took a look at it, we decided to accelerate this because there's only 1 or 2 years left on the turf. So, you know, this may have been a year or a phase 2 project, but because of the condition of the turf, we decided to move that up into phase 1.
Thank you both.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I apologize if I am asking questions that have already been asked. It's difficult to participate this way, but I'm doing the best I can.
That's fine.
So we'll go back to the very beginning on page 4 when we talked about the capacity in the schools, and we have marked capacity in the middle schools. And I believe I understood that was because we have larger areas for instruction, auditoriums per se. So is that to say that we don't have this many extra spaces in these buildings for students? Is that accurate, or do we actually have extra capacity in our middle schools?
My appraisal of that is you do have extra capacity, but I would temper that with the fact that we have a gymnasium that's counting towards that capacity. So you might knock those numbers down by 100, but that would be the most. The auditorium carries no capacity, so there's no capacity for the auditoriums or the pools.
When we did the reconfiguration 2 years ago, that's one of the things that we actually did consider as a possibility of closing one of those schools and going to an east and west side middle school. But we made the decision just because of the programs in those elementary or middle schools and the students, and we felt that having that many students in 2 locations would be too much to handle administratively and programmatically.
So my question is, I did some research today on your company, and I apologize for not being able to have heard your names, but one of the schools in particular that I saw was a Logan Middle School, where you did grades 4 through 8, and you did it on 2 different levels. Like a first floor was 4 through 6, and a second floor was 7 through 8. And I'm just curious, because Woodrow, Milton, and Lincoln are close to each other, and the cost for renovations at Lincoln is quite high, what your thoughts were on us possibly being able to reconfigure some of our middle school buildings into that model, if you saw that as an option for us when you were going through the buildings.
To answer your question, we did not look at that specifically for your middle school building. But I will tell you, in the case study that you referred to, we did vertically separate that building with grades, the elementary grades on a lower level, which were basically self-contained classrooms. On the upper level, which was the 7th and 8th grade levels, was more of a departmentized configuration and team teaching. It has worked very successfully for that particular school district. But we'd be happy to take a look at that for your buildings here if you would like to do that.
Well, I guess I was also looking at the fact that we have so many renovations over at Edison, and then we have this beautiful East Middle School, and I was wondering if there wasn't a possibility for us to consider that as well in East Middle School with a, and I'm sorry if I'm throwing things out that are crazy at this time for obviously for transportation and everything else, but it's just an idea that came to me that it might be able to reduce some of our costs on renovations if we were able to look at that model in our middle schools. I know that would mean reconfiguring elementary and looking at K through 3 models. I'm just thinking outside the box right now because we are going to be spending so much money.
There are districts that have an elementary building within a middle school building. So, I mean, it may be possible that you have an Edison within a Wilson Middle School, as an example.
Well, I guess there's more looking at not a whole elementary school, just I saw that 4 through 6 and 7 through 8 model.
Yeah, I think that would be more administratively, for the administration to answer that, whether that's a challenge to do that or not.
Yeah, I would think that would be a bit of a challenge. I mean, certainly something we can look at, but we finally, for the first time in a long time, have consistent grade configurations across the district. And while this would save some dollars with Lincoln and possibly Edison, it would mean that we would be going back to that split configuration where we would have to actually do things a little differently in different schools because of the way they are structured. So I don't know, B, if you would want to speak to that.
I think that we could look at it, but I agree with you. We've just got to this point where we feel the 10 buildings have the pre-K to 5, and then the 6 to 8s, and then the 9 12s. But I hear you, Ms. Feeney, and I think that it's something that we can, at least explore a little bit as an option.
I think that we just figured out about how to get through pre-K through 5, because that's what everybody thought was the best idea, and to change it would be a lot, personally. I think that everybody liked the idea of the elementary students being together, the middle school students being together, and the high school students being together. So that's just my opinion. We just did that too, not that long ago.
Always things to be considered. Okay.
Frank?
Yes.
Just one more question on the stadium. The concrete work, are you talking about that retaining wall surrounding the stadium?
Robbie don't know.
Yeah,
You're looking at Robbie, but they know.
I wasn't with the architect.
That work, in general, would be the retaining wall around the stadium, the dividing wall between the field and the bleachers around the stadium, as well as the bleacher seats themselves, and the handrails that go around the entire area. There's some spalling concrete, some failing concrete, the handrails are coming out, you can see there. That would all be addressed within that scope of work. Also, at the entrance, there's the angled cement that would be addressed as part of that. There's some spalling, failing areas there. And really, it's just, getting to those restoration items across the entire surrounding area.
Okay, as long as we're asking these questions. So what about like the steps coming down in the stadium, the steps themselves, I don't know what you call them. You know how steep they are. I mean, how, up on that level, they're a huge step. Is that to be addressed in any way, shape, or form, or was that?
No, that would take an actual structural change to do that. It was just a restoration of the existing concrete.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. I come in the door of the field.
It could be worse. Okay. I think from there, just the idea of, to conclude the timeline at this point is the fact that once we get into that third year of construction and design, we would then go back, reprioritize, as we stated, those future necessities of the district and see what is required to tackle next. Then start to allocate, the next phase of these renovations, and that's where our design for the future phases would start to take over, is at the end of that third-year design, we then start to reallocate these items here.
So that pretty much concludes our condensed version of what's in the report. There's a lot of material there to digest. We talked to Mr. Polito about giving the board an opportunity to take this under advisement, think about it, and then we're obviously available to come back as a resource to answer more questions, unless we have more to see, obviously.
Big mouth, just a bunch of questions. Obviously, we're all concerned about the numbers. In your estimation, the numbers that are included in this report, would you consider your estimates to be conservative, subject to 10% up or down? Where are you with your estimated numbers?
I think we're a little bit on the conservative side, not 10% conservative. In those soft costs that we alluded to on the spreadsheets, there's a contingency in there as well, over and above that. So it gives us a little bit of latitude to bring things in on budget. We also talked about controlling the budget, so that we talked about alternate bids with your maintenance and facilities group and administration here about having some budget-saving alternates to stay within the budget. So I think that's the approach that we're going to be taking on this first wave, so that we can manage this. If you say we're only going to spend X number of dollars in year one, then you have to reprioritize and do alternates to satisfy that. This is not cut in stone. I mean, there may be priorities that the board would rather see added or deleted from what we put on the screen here. So, I mean, it's an open book for that right now. We try to give you a starting point to start to think about this. Where are the priorities, and then how do you go about getting things done?
I think that's really the advantage to this approach too, because we're not going, except for Edison, building by building and doing complete renovations. So we can adapt as we go along, and once we determine how much we can afford and move down that path, if it does start to get more expensive than we anticipated, we're doing our biggest priorities, our highest priorities first, and then if we can't get to everything, then that's just something we're going to have to deal with at that point.
Thank you.
Any other questions for these guys?
I just have one real quick question. When you talk about Erie High, and the road that runs alongside of Erie High, is that included in the paving project, or is that a city street? That runs right along the side of Erie High. Is that included in our property, or is that a city street?
That wouldn't be, that's a city street.
All right, thank you, that's all. Thank you.
I think that might be ours, the north side. The north side.
You're not talking about the alley. You're not talking about the alley. You're talking about the actual street behind
The street running
behind Sterling
along the
Square.
side goes from Cherry to Peach Street.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's
a street.
That's a city street. Well, we need to call the city.
If nothing else, we thank you guys. Good
Thank
job.
you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a lot of hard work, and we really appreciate everything that is. Okay, next we have Mike Zabasic and Nick Falgione from PNC Capital Markets. They're going to talk about some various options to finance these renovations. So really what we're seeing right now, and we're working through the finalization of our numbers, is that between the bond issue that they are going to share with you tonight, as well as the surplus that we anticipate for the first couple of years of our projections, we should be able to do all of this work over the next 3 years.
I heard it.
I heard you, Brian. I heard you.
Thanks. Around the corner here.
Well, yeah, he just said that he was going to go through all this. I'm excited for some good news, because that stressed me out.
Yeah. I think that was on.
I was gonna start the car wash sales and car wash. You got this covered.
Since we talked about it,
Good. Right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having us here tonight. We prepared a summary, Nick and myself, to review with you. The first page, just to give you the highlights, we've constructed 3 financing scenarios. Obviously, they're really unlimited. Just to give you a framework right now of some of the numbers you've been hearing or might possibly consider. But if it's 60, if it's 30, if it's 90, you know, whatever it is, and you say to us, and try to keep it X amount per year in terms of what we're going to pay back, then we go back and put something together, and you may like it, you may not. The one thing to always keep in mind, you'll see as we go through here, for example, the first scenario, that's based on borrowing 50 million, scenario 1. And there we said, how low can we keep your payments and still borrow 50 million? And we whittled it down within reasonable considerations, not doing anything crazy in terms of repayment term. You require an incremental increase in your debt payments of 500,000. 2, also looking at 50 million, but then we said, well, what if that was a 3 million annual increase in your budget, and perhaps taking some of that 14 and applying it to the repayment of debt. And that's really where we started our analysis was, if we would apply 3 million, and talking with the administration, if we took 3 million, how much can we borrow and pay that back? And that worked out to be about 50 million. The third scenario is we bumped it up to 70 million, still keep it at 3 million. And this is where whatever scenarios we provide to you, just always remember there's trade-offs, right? I mean, 50 to 70, oh, we can do it both at 3 million, yes, but of course 70 is going to require a longer repayment term and therefore more interest costs. And there's really no right or wrong answers to these types of questions on your part. It's really, what can we afford annually? And or you may say, well, we want to try to keep it to a somewhat reasonable cost, the total we're going to pay. And whatever priority you place, many school districts have done either one. So it's really what you're comfortable with as a board and representing your public. In terms of course, if and when you borrow in the public markets, the single biggest determinant of the cost you're going to pay is your credit rating, your bond rating. Much like when you go to for a car loan or a home mortgage, you review your credit situations. The one thing we've done and with many school districts that we've been working with, and ratings go, if we take this rating here from Moody's, just to give you an idea, the highest rating is AAA, and then there's AA. Between AA and AAA, there's AA1, AA2, AA3. The lower you go, the worse the rating. Similarly, there's AA, then there's A1, A2, A3. Okay, A2 is a good rating. It's a good, solid rating to borrow money at. And in conjunction with the state and the program they have, you can be guaranteed, if you will, an A2 rating, notwithstanding what your own underlying rating is on its own, which they'll also analyze. But you at least know going into borrowing money, you'll have at least an A2 rating. And what they do is they just have a requirement where the money's to be coming up due to be paid on bonds every 6 months. They need to be deposited with the bank 15 days ahead of that. That's where the pre-default comes into place. So if there's a problem or there's an issue, then there's a 15-day cure period. And that's why investors get comfortable with that, and the rating agencies are comfortable with that. But aside from that is your own underlying rating, which hasn't been looked at, correct me if I'm wrong, for quite some time. And a lot has changed to the good, hopefully, at least in our eyes and the rating agency's eyes, since the last time they looked at you. I mean, the yeoman's effort that all of you, the board, administration, have put into the budgetary efforts. If you know, we're looking at the swap, and if you terminate that, that's viewed as a positive, to the rating agency. And the biggest key too is how they won't necessarily raise their eyebrows and say, oh my goodness, you're going to borrow 70, 80 million, that's bad. What they're more interested in is, do you have a plan
to pay that back. How reasonable is it? What burden is it gonna place on your taxpayers or on your budget? And as long as you have good explanations and you've planned for it, and clearly that's what you're doing now, that's not necessarily a bad thing that you're borrowing money. It also, in a way, is a good thing because you're bringing up-to-date facilities and hopefully attracting more students and families here. So that's another consideration. And then lastly, we did look at, in addition to borrowing for projects, what if you terminate your swap? And this is something we've monitored for many, many years. And of course, the goal is always to get you out of it where it's not going to cost you money, where you have to pay to get out of it. And where the market is right now, Nick will talk about it a little bit, you could terminate that swap and get rid of all the fees and the floating payments and net about $173,000 to the good. And really, even if it was break even, in order to get out of the swap and some of the risks that are inherent with it and go back to the good old plain vanilla fixed rate bonds would be, you know, a good thing, obviously, for the district. The next page.
What's the balance of that swap?
It's about 37.9.
37.
There's a lot of numbers here. I'll just call your attention to a couple. If you look at the left and the AAA MMD, that's just a benchmark index in the municipal bond market. Municipal bond market different than the federal treasury market. Municipal bond market, you don't pay, the investors don't pay federal income tax on it, so the rate's lower than if you would buy a treasury bond. The yellow line is where rates were a year ago. Dotted line, where they are now. So they've gone up, which is, you know, the market unfortunately doesn't stand still while you do your due considerations. They can go up or down. They've been trending up. They still are near, very historically speaking, over the last 30 years, still very attractive, very low. The other thing to note about the dotted line, which is current rates, you see on the right there, the Federal Reserve, as you know, has been raising interest rates, short-term rates, here over the last year and a half. What that does is it brings up the short-term borrowing rates, 1, 2, 5 years, but it has the effect of keeping long-term rates, 30 years, somewhat suppressed, because what are they doing by raising rates? They're trying to keep the economy from overheating and inflation. And that's a long-term investor's worst nightmare. If they bought a 30-year bond and they're getting a fixed rate of 4% for the next 30 years, and inflation starts creeping up, that interest they're getting is paying for less and less goods and services. So we'll call it kind of like a flat yield curve. Is actually good for you because the bonds are out 20, 30 years that you'll be paying back, which are substantial. The rates are relatively attractive, again, from a historical perspective. And you can see that also down at the bottom, where it's circled there where we have it. You know, it's finance guys, we're not good with the lasers, but I almost burned a hole in your head, I'm sorry. Yeah. You can see, again, the short-term rates have gone up a lot more, 2-year, 3-year, than the long-term rates. So they're going up, but if there is good news in that, they're going up a lot less where you can borrow 20 and 30 years. And of course, that the longer you keep your money out, the more interest you pay, so that'll help you. The ratio between what you're borrowing at, or what you pay for taxes and versus taxable rates, comes into play when you look at terminating the swap, and Nick will talk about that in a minute. The third page and fourth page is real quick for your review to refresh your minds about, this is your, page 3 is your existing debt service. We will smooth out that uptick when we do the new borrowing, so it'll all be level. So there won't be a bump in 7 or 8 years for a future board to have to deal with. We're going to take care of that in this financing. And again, you can see at the tail end there, after 12 or 13 years, you know, almost all the debt's paid off. Again, there's always a trade-off I'll go back to. It's good for you because you can wrap what we call, or start to pay down a lot of principal after the 12 years or after 2040, right here. So there's a lot of the money you borrow now, you can fill it up and pay it back pretty quickly once you get this debt paid off. So what we do is, why do we put a lot of the principal back here? Well, it's going to cost us more interest because you're deferring paying it back quicker. Well, the alternative is have this number go up over 12, 13 million in your budget, and that for some would be a problem. And again, we can do anything you want, but that's 95% of school districts do this back-end approach because you've got to be reasonable in terms of what your taxpayers can afford.
Especially in our situation where we have the bonds, we're only 13 years out till everything is paid off. And
yes. That's
Sort
a,
of
so you're in a
fund,
great
if you were,
position to
you
be
know,
in.
we're floating more 20 to 25 years to finance these type of projects.
Yeah, some districts we work with, they may have debt out to this far, at this level. So gee, now what do? You wrap around that, but now you're going out 35, 40 years, it really starts to kill you, the interest. And then this is just numerically showing you issue by issue what your payments are. And again, this is the debt that we would get rid of if we terminate the swap, because along with the swap are the bonds that are related to it. So these payments would go away and be rolled into a new issue. And again, at a net savings of $170,000. I'll turn it over to Nick now. He'll run you through some of the analysis he's done.
Thanks, Mike. So there's really three parts to it. The first part, in the first page, there's the 2009 bonds. They're callable next year early enough where we can have a tax-exempt refunding of those bonds and lower the rate on them. Right now, the rate's about 5.2%, and on the left-hand side there. And if we did it today, the new rate would be about 4.4%, which is about 0.8% lower. The net present value savings from that is about $187,000. And when you look at the refunded bonds, it's about $3.7 million. We're saving about 5% of that. It's been higher before, but anytime you're saving at least 3% of what you're refinancing, it makes sense to contemplate that. This also will fit in nicely into reducing the cost of the capital program. On the right-hand side, we have a summary table that shows the refunded 2009 bonds, a proposed refunding issue, and then savings each year on an annual basis. How we carve the savings may be a little bit different in the final analysis, but this gives you an idea of the scale of what can be accomplished from the 2009 bonds. This issue is not reimbursable, so all the savings accrue to the district. You get to keep them all. You don't have to share those at the state. So that's the first component. On the next page...
That was the cafeteria bond.
That's right. Page 6 shows us the swap. So there's a couple pieces to it. Looking on the left-hand side, what does the swap cost us all in? And the swap rate's of 4.11%, you see on the top there.
If I'm bugging you, Nick, just stop me. I'm kind of liking this thing. So.
It's helping me, thanks. And then the letter of credit fee is 1.45%, and the cost to reset the rate on the floating rate bonds each week is 0.1%. So when you add up all those different numbers, it's about 5.66%. So naturally you say, okay, I can refinance at 3.85%, it's about a 1.8% differential. The thing you have to take into consideration though is how much does it cost to break the swap, which is basically a fixed rate instrument to counterparty. That number is about $5.1 million. So to terminate the swap, we'd save about 1.8%, but we have to pay about $5 million to terminate that. The one thing that's interesting is that all those support costs up there, the 1.45 and the 0.1%, when you look at that in today's dollars, it's about 4.7 million. So those are not exactly on top of each other, but they're pretty close. So that's a good trade-off to have as far as the analysis. Savings is marginally positive. It's about $173,000 net after estimated costs. I'm sorry, the number is $36 million roughly swap. Thank you, sorry. And on the right-hand side there, we basically have kept it neutral with some of the savings concentrated in 2019. So this is the second component of it. What's difficult about this is we actually have to capture two markets. One is the treasury market that swaps are priced in, and our market, which is the municipal bond market. There's two moving targets. We try to catch them when they cross each other, ideally. About 2 months ago, that number was higher. And it's something we have to monitor as we get closer to actually transacting, and whether it makes sense to terminate the entire swap, all of it, pieces of it, or none of it at that time. But right now, it's marginally positive, so that's something to consider. Sorry, page 5 is so small, but we're trying to get a lot of information on it. So this is the three structures, the scenario 1, scenario 2, and scenario 3 that Mike went over at the beginning. And what scenario 1 does is it tries to show us what's the lowest we can put the debt service to fund a $50 million project. We have to go out to 2048 to do it, about $276 million of total debt, but it's about a $500,000 increase. Just to step back for 1 minute, these numbers all assume these projects are not reimbursable by the state. So we're assuming 0% reimbursement participation by the state. So obviously if the state subsidizes it, it helps it, but this is the most conservative situation, it's 0. Middle scenario looks at $50 million. projects. Again, the impact from this is delayed until 2021 school year. We see 0, 0, then $3 million. And obviously that takes us from, instead of 2048, final maturity to 2036. That's about a $70 million difference in total debt service over time. So that's part of the trade-off between what can we afford and what we want to pay and how to structure that. The far right takes the middle scenario and looks at a $70 million project, and we have to add about 6 years to it to accomplish that. Same impact, $11.9 million of debt service once we peak up in 2021, and we take that out to 2042. So that's just the first looks at it, and these are obviously numbers that we can manipulate to customize the way you want to be. This gives you an idea of what I like to call the bookends of what's possible for the district. That was kind of fast. I don't know if you have questions. Sorry.
Go ahead, Bob.
The elimination of the swaption, which is about 35 million,
Yeah.
is that going to be handled separately from the, whatever?
These models assume they're done together.
So to eliminate that, you'd need to take roughly, depending upon which scenario you look at, about 35%, 40% of the total borrowing to eliminate the swaption or the swap.
We would basically replace one bond with another. So if we get rid of 35 million, we're going to issue a new 35 million to do it. The difference is that new 35 million will be fixed rate, semi-annual conventional bonds or no debt versus the more complicated structure the swap contains. So there's no way to reduce the debt on it, but it does, dollar for dollar, it's a more conservative debt structure for the district.
We have to pay that $5 million to actually do the swap, to get out of that.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, I think, when I started here, based on what the interest rates were in 2015, the payment to get out of the swap was $13 million. So you can see, again, it's actually kind of working the way it should. As the interest rates are rising, the swap payment is going down. So it's kind of, to some extent, working to our advantage right now.
And keep in mind, again, you pay $5 million now, but if you kept the swap out for its entirety, and all the fees, everything else was there now, you're going to end up paying $4.7 million in today's dollars. So, as Nick said, if somebody just looks at the 5 and says, wow, well, it's not like you're not going to pay anything if you keep it outstanding. So.
I guess what I was looking at was the cost of the renovation, our plan, versus the net monies that we're looking at here. It's going to be very, very, well, it won't be. We're going to not have sufficient funds to fund the plan
I
in
guess,
phase
I
one.
got your question. He's wondering with the 36 mil or whatever it is, we're
That
borrowing
comes off.
50, does that leave us 14?
No, it does not. Actually,
That's
we would,
where he's.
if we just, probably the other scenario we should show you is, what if we just issued $50 million and did nothing else? No swaps, no 2009 bonds.
Right.
That issue size would probably be a little under $50 million because the way the bonds are coupon. So say it's 50 million. So
Right.
I'm going to step here just a point. This 92 million, of that 92 million, about 40 of it is refunding. So we refund $3 million of 9 bonds and 36 and some change of the swap, and also inside that's the swap termination. So it doesn't. If adding the swap takes away from the available funds for the project, then we would recommend not doing the swap. If it's marginally positive, it's not going to take away anything from the project.
Dave, could you go back to our current debt service structure? Maybe that would be helpful to show which bonds are affected by this swap.
So it'd be, actually, the table's probably better than the chart. So just going left to right, it'd be column D, that's the 2009 bonds, and then column F, which is the swap. and then column K, which are the support costs for the swap.
So we
So
actually.
you get rid of these, yeah.
You're gonna get rid of
We
those
actually
and replace them with new bonds.
We have Series 2011 variable rate bonds that are in the swap. So we would be advance refunding those and issuing, so we would pay those bonds off and issue new bonds in their place.
That's right.
So we're not increasing our debt service by an additional 35 million to get out of the swap. We're taking those proceeds and paying that $35 million off.
And when you do a bond issue, you file with the state all the appropriate documentation, and one thing you file with them is a debt statement. They're saying, well, how much have you increased your debt? Because there's legal limits on how much you can borrow. So in this case, they would say for the swap in the 09, you would see 40 million being added, but then they'd see 37 or 38 coming off. So, okay, net to you, you're only eating into your capacity by just.
I think when we actually do this, we'll have separate series for each of those purposes, so you can see discreetly, this is for the project, this is for the refinancing, this is for the swap. It'll make it like cleaner for planning line too.
Yeah, we will, please, we just try to give you a high level here tonight, that's where you are. We'll give as much time as you need when you get closer to it, page by page if you want, give you all the details, so that it's not, we don't want you to think it's a black box. You'll understand everything that goes into it before you would give us your okay.
Every time these guys come in my office, I think I understand everything that's going on, and 10 minutes later, after they leave, I'm completely lost.
Yeah.
There's a lot to this in particular, but yeah, like Mike said, we'll pull the hood up and show you what's in the engine, so you can see how it works.
Any other questions? Okay. We thank you guys.
Well, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
So with that, with the $50 million and the surpluses we anticipate for the first couple of years of this 5-year projection, we think we're getting very close to the 80 million that we need to actually start the phase 1 project. So what the next steps, what we would like to do is we're going through again with PFM and trying to finalize our numbers for 2018. 17, 18, and update the projections. We anticipate that being done here very shortly. So for the next step, I'd like to try to set a date where we can get together and pull all this together. So we have the projections done. We gave you what we're looking at for the curriculum and remedial supports. This is what we're proposing as far as what we want to do with the construction. Kind of pull all that together into the projections, look at what it does to our budget over the next 5 years, and have some discussions about how we want to proceed moving forward, and what we want to commit to now, and what we maybe want to make a decision about later. And Mike, if you have another minute, one of the things that we had hoped when we started looking at this back in August was that we could have some time to make the decision on the bond issue, and at that point, it seemed like the market was pretty stable, but from what you guys are seeing right now, it's getting a little more volatile, and at this point, is your recommendation that we should be considering possibly doing this sooner rather than later, just because there's a concern that the interest rates will be going up next year?
Yeah, that's a fair assumption, that's what we've seen, and of course you read the papers, you can see it.
I was going to ask you that question, Brian. If the Feds increase the interest rate, how will that impact this?
We can tell you, when we run the second set of numbers, we'll show you what happens if interest rates go up a 0.25%, 0.5%. I think it's safe to say there's not much pressure for rates to go down. And one chart we showed with the interest rates, on the right-hand side, it shows where people think the Federal Reserve is going to be on their interest rate hikes, and they're all in the 90% range.
So one thing we might suggest respectfully is if you have this next meeting and you have a consensus that, okay, we know we need to borrow, we need to do some of this work, we're not sure how much yet. It takes about 6 weeks to put all the paperwork together, ratings, to get in a position to access the markets. And so if we kind of get that legwork behind us, where you're poised to enter the market, if you tell us, okay, we're ready, we can jump in to minimize your risk to rates going up. So you've knocked off 6 weeks away from it. So that might be something to consider, because it doesn't cost you any money if you don't do the bond issue. The only fee you'll be out of pocket if you never did a bond issue would be the rating fee, which might would be 25, 30, 20,000 or something like that. But no other professional fees are incurred. And so it's just something to consider to get yourselves poised, get all your ducks in a row. We can go in the market like this if we see something bad happening or something good happen. Maybe it's just to go, maybe you're thinking about you want to do 50 or 60. Well, let's just go in and do 25 right now because we know we've got some immediate needs. It just gives you some flexibility.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So we're hoping to possibly get together, looking at the calendar today, I think that probably with next week being the last week before Thanksgiving, we might want to shoot for sometime after Thanksgiving, and I'm thinking that maybe a Saturday morning again might be a good approach to do this, just bring everything together and spend the morning looking at the numbers and making some decisions. So I would prefer, if possible, if we can set a date that's sooner rather than later, so that we can I would really like to get the architects going on what we want to start doing next year, so that we don't miss another construction period, and then make a decision on the bond, so we can tell them yes or no as far as getting ready to enter the market. So
You're looking at the first?
first, we could start there, see if that's workable for everybody.
First is good for me.
I'm fine with the first.
Okay.
I'm good for the first.
Everybody okay over here? Bobby?
I may have a conflict. I don't know for sure, but.
Well, I know you're not golfing then.
Sir?
You're not golfing at that time, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in Myrtle Beach though, right?
Yes.
Well, so far it looks good for the first, so. I would, I'm good, so.
You want to tentatively schedule that?
Yeah, I have to send something to Tom, because he's not here, but yeah, you might as well.
Great.
Brian, what time is that?
Probably 8 or 8:30.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything on new business? We do need executive session. Anything else before we take a 5-10 minute? Yeah, Tyler.
So I'm gonna give you whiplash for a second, because this is a rapid topic change. But I just wanna call attention that the holidays are coming up, and so this is just a really high stress time for students. So we're gonna have a lot of triggering events. And so when we have triggering events, we're gonna have more child abuse kind of stuff coming up, and we're gonna have more suicide ideation, and that, so I just kind of want to make sure that our teachers are watching and that our support staff are watching, because we're going to have more kids who are, kids who need love the most are going to ask for it in the most unloving ways, and especially this season that we're going into, so just kind of be cognizant of that as we go on.
Thank you. If nothing else, we'll recess and convene in conference room 3.